Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. I am your host, Lonnie Jones. My wife Jackie and I moved to the city of Huntsville in 1986 for me to be a youth and family minister. I have been a minister since 1980. I have served in this community as a police chaplain assigned to a SWAT team since 1992, and I've been in private practice as a licensed professional counselor since 1998. I'm also an adventure educator and an avid outdoorsman. I dabble in rock climbing and I goof around with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Our life has been full of many wonderful experiences and some just outright adventures. I used to write about those things in a little church bulletin article. So now instead of asking you to read those things, we're just going to talk about them in our podcast. And as we talk about them, we're going to talk about the facts. The facts lead to concepts, and the concepts lead to application. One caveat about the facts is, for the most part, we're going to tell you the facts just as they happened. But every now and then, we're going to tell you the way other people have told us they remember it happening with a little bit of embellishment. It's all good, clean fun and for educational purposes. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy Keeping Up with Jones. Faulkner University announces a 60% tuition discount for members of the Church of Christ. Now, there are some guidelines. This 60% tuition reduction is applicable to adult undergraduate Bible degrees or graduate Bible degrees from the Curley Graduate School of Theology in the VP Black College of Biblical Studies. You must satisfy all admission requirements and maintain satisfactory academic progress. You must remain continuously enrolled, including summers, until the completion of the degree. You must provide a letter from an elder or minister, preferably on church letterhead, verifying that you're an active member of a Church of Christ congregation prior to your initial enrollment. This offer applies to adult undergraduate degrees such as biblical studies, youth and family ministry tracks, and it also includes graduate degrees. Those are the Master of Arts in Biblical Studies, the Master of Arts in Family Life Ministry, or a Master of Theology, and it also applies to the PhD in Biblical Studies. For undergraduate inquiries, please contact Adult Enrollment, 334-386-7140, 334-386-7140, or Adult Enrollment at Faulkner edu. That is Adult Enrollment at faulkner.edu. For graduate inquiries, please call 334-386-7539, 334-386-7539. Graduate enrollment at faulkner.edu. That is graduate enrollment at faulkner.edu. Faulkner University is a sponsor of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. TKM Incorporated in Moss, Tennessee is a construction company that specializes in erosion control, seeding, and soil, hydroseeding, hydromulch, minor excavation, and silt fence. They also provide traffic control and construction signs. Their business is keeping people safe, but their passion, their mission, is they wish that all men could be saved. TKM has adopted the nickname the King's Men because as they serve you, they also serve the King. If they could provide any of their services for you, please contact them at 931-243-3958. That is 931-243-3958. Or you can contact them on the net at tkminc2001 at twlakes.net. That is tkminc2001 at twlakes.net. TKM Incorporated is a sponsor of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. I used my artwork in college as a mercenary cartoonist. I borrowed the phrase from a guy named Tim Petty, and I drew stuff on T-shirts. I drew stuff on posters. I sold ads for a restaurant, cartoons to a newspaper, and I sold bootlegged airbrush T-shirts out of my dorm room. After moving to Huntsville and after several years as a full-time youth and family minister, I finally went into private practice and opened up my own business. I'm a small business owner, and I also own a small business. But after opening up Jones LPC and Youth Resources, it turned out that my schedule had turned from being an overburdened, no free time of a full-time youth and family minister to a seemingly more moderate schedule that included some periods of downtime. And I quickly discovered that sitting in an office and staring at a phone will not make it ring. And thus the lovely Miss Jackie suggested, why don't you just take advantage of not having work to do or not having to do work and do something with your spare time? One of the things I decided to do was get back involved with some of my art projects. And I decided that once or even twice a year, I'd donate a large wall painting to a local school or organization. I really like to paint on large surfaces. I've done several large wall projects. I did a giant grizzly bear at Mountain Gap. I did the 2 Mustangs in the old building for Madison Academy on Max Luther. I did a daycare at a 24/7 gym where I painted this huge little pasture with a fence and all these little stuffed animals and little forest animals. And at the very top of the steps, when you turn to go from the bottom floor to the little loft area, I painted this little bear, and the children would come up on top of the steps and try to hug the bear, and they hugged it so much that they faded the paint off of it, and I had to go back and redo it. LB and I did a mural for a children's daycare center in Honduras. And she and I painted the front lawn at Shorter University for homecoming one year, made it like a giant sign laying on the ground that said, "Welcome home." I did a giant samurai and gave it to Brandon and those guys at 10th Planet. And my favorite big painting project was the 2 large wood spider men that I cut out and painted for Gunner's bedroom. But now I'm donating paintings, and my project is I'm going to do this project for Central School. Now, leading up to doing this project, I'd become interested in the graffiti type artwork that you see on trains and overpasses and in various buildings. I gotten fascinated with the idea that rather than using the small airbrush that I use to paint T-shirts, I could use spray cans and cover large areas of the wall. And so I began to do my research. I found a guy online that basically was posting pictures of things that he had painted that he shouldn't have painted on. I don't know how he kept from getting arrested, but he had all these examples of these large pieces of art that he'd done on train cars and overpasses and buildings. He was a tagging artist or a tagger or a vandal or a graffiti artist. And so I contacted the young man about his art. And basically I said, hey, I'm an older artist. I've only ever painted with an airbrush, and I want to get into using these spray cans. And are there special tips you put on the ends of the cans to get the kind of spray effect you want, or are you just using what's commercially available? And he replied in writing, but I superimposed, the California dude voice on him. He was like, dude, they're called caps, man. I'd recommend you buy some bennies and some New York Thins and maybe 1 or 2 markers. You can find it all at Mass Appeal. And so, sure enough, I looked up Mass Appeal and I typed in the bennies and the New York Thins. I really wasn't sure what I was ordering, and I got my gear. I got these beautiful array of paints. I got these caps to put on the things, and so now I'm going to do a foray into being a vandal artist. Brad Carter, the original vandal for Jesus, would be proud. Brad regaled us with stories from his days as a junior high school student of riding around Cloverdale, Indiana on his bicycle delivering papers on Sunday morning. And he decided that if he had rearranged the signs on the Methodist church sign, that he could embarrass them and people wouldn't come to the Methodist church. They'd go to the Cloverdale Church of Christ. But that's the way Brad's mind worked. Anyway, so I've got this picture that I'm going to paint at Central School, and it's going to be my very first spray paint project that's not using an airbrush, but actually using these graffiti cans. The motto for Central's reading initiative was called Reading Takes You Places. And so we came up with the idea of a guy surfing, writing an open book. And the book's not page up, it's page down. So it makes an inverted V. And the guy's dressed like Tony Hawk. He's got his cap on backwards, but he's writing this upside down book like a V, and he's writing it like the Green Goblin rides that hoverboard that he rides. And so that was going to be our design. I started the project at about 7:30 a.m. and I began to paint. I stacked up books. I put the paint cans in an odd order, and I put some little boxes up, and I shone a light against them to create this shadow on the wall that made my city skyscape. And so I painted that dark black, and I put some yellow highlights in it. And then above this city skyline, I drew the guy Green Goblin style surfing on top of this book. And then I airbrushed the letters over the top. Reading will take you places. I used 11 colors. I had 11 different cans of spray paint. And every time you use a spray paint can, you have to shake it vigorously. You have to shake the paint cans. I used 11 different colors to complete this vision. Now, in an airbrush project, you just basically pre-mix your paints. You have these little glass bottles, and you spray the old paint out using a cleanser or a thinner, and you just put on the next bottle, and you mix these. You pre-mix these paints, and then you stir them with a little stick. And I like to put Windex in my paints to thin them out, and that's how you. But when you paint with the paint cans, every time you pick up a can, you have to shake the can. When you paint with an airbrush, the paints are not shaken, they're stirred. But with spray cans, they're not stirred, they're shaken. And they're shaken multiple times, and they're shaken often, and they're shaken with monotonous regularity. There are times when I would just be standing in the hall shaking a paint can in each hand, looking at the artwork, trying to decide what I'm going to do next. Shaking paint cans became a ritual. Shaking paint cans became routine. It was mindless and it was habitual. And every time there was a pause in painting, I was shaking paint cans. Several hours later, and who knows how many of the actual hours I spent shaking paint cans, but after all the painting and all the shaking, I got in the tactical Toyota and I headed home. I absent-mindedly grabbed the Diet Sundrop that I had left in the truck to celebrate the end of my project and quench my thirst. I was holding the can in my left hand, and my left hand was also holding the steering wheel, so the can is very, very close to my face. And I reached over and I popped the can on the steering wheel. And when I popped the top, I did not blow out my flip-flop, but I nearly lost my eye. The spewing font of citrus liquid entered my brain through my eye and one of my nostrils. I coughed, I sputtered, I gagged, I blindly guided my truck out of the flow of traffic. I diffused the spewing, foaming torrent of yellow-green death, and I wiped the stuff out of my eyes and out of my nose and off my shirt, and I sat there feeling like a fool. I don't even remember shaking the soda can like a paint can. But all morning, I had been shaking cans. And then there was probably some little voice in the back of my head. I absent-mindedly in the truck pick up this can, and all I've done all morning is shake cans. And as I'm shaking, unconsciously, unaware, out of my mind, shaking this soda can, there's probably a little voice in the back of my head that says, "Hey man, shouldn't there be the sound of a marble stirring up paint? The thing you're doing is not making the sounds you want it to make." But if there was that little voice warning me that this habit had followed me to my truck, I ignored it. Soda cans and paint cans can be surprising similar in shape, but they're very, very different in content, and they're very, very different in response. And so yet another chapter from the Wile E. Coyote book of fiascos, debacles, and worst-case scenarios comes to a close. Habits are natural, and habits are neutral. They're neither good nor bad. The fact that they are habits just means that they are things that we do without consciously thinking about them. And because some of the things we do involve or require thoughtless repetition, without thought, the repetition can and does sometimes become dangerous. even habits that have been formed recently and haven't been habits for very long, like the 2-hour habit of shaking paint cans. Habits are just performed. They're actions that you do without thinking. The soda can felt like a spray paint can. And without thinking, what I've been doing all morning, it was natural, it was unconscious, and it was even comfortable right up to the point I tried to open the can. Anger, foul language, coarse language, rude language, violence. Those things sometimes happen because of the way the situation feels. When you start thinking about habits and how to break them, habits are broken when intellect overcomes emotion or when intention enters the equation. Why am I shaking a soda can? Why am I thinking this? Why am I saying that? Why am I acting this way? Will this do what I really want it to do? You see, I'm shaking this soda can and I'm not spraying a wall. I'm about to spray my brains out. That simple thought process would have solved the whole fiasco. You see, what's the purpose of saying this or doing this? Any response pattern that happens is one that has the potential to control us and us not be the ones that are actually in control. See, just because I was shaking cans in school doesn't mean I should shake every can I put my hands on. Spouses often communicate and settle conflicts at home the same way they handle things at work or with other people. I remember a story about a lady, and her husband was the owner and manager of a company that manufactured concrete blocks. And the lady was reported that she would tell her husband, "Don't use that block plant voice with me." You see, whatever that sounded like, the block plant voice, tone, or word selection had a very different response with his spouse than it did with the block plant people. You see, the thing that sounds cool and good and acceptable in an exchange between two teenagers may sound really, really different. It may sound smart or offensive when you use that same tone or that same language with an adult, with a parent, with a coach, or with a cop. The way we talk to our peers may or may not be the way we should talk to our spouses or our children. Now, in athletics, in art, music, dance, gymnastics, or in the arena of martial arts, there seems to be a level of performance where we actually perform things that look like thoughtless actions. It's what we inappropriately call muscle memory, but your muscles don't actually have memory. More accurately, it should be called unconscious competence. These habits result from discipline. Paul talks about bringing his body into subjection. The list of the fruits of the Spirit involves self-control. And when we start talking about self-control and you talk about the habits of discipline, they're not mindless, thoughtless, rote rituals. You see, when you do something athletically or artistically, or you do something in the martial arts arena and it looks like it's thoughtless and mindless, no. The thought process has gone before, and now we are executing a practiced protocol. But with the exception, outside the arena of performance, athletically, artistically, or martial arts, we should stop and ask what we are doing and why we are doing what we're doing. What are we saying? And why are we saying what we're saying? And I'll even go ahead and include the habits we develop in our thought processes. Why do we always default to that line of thinking, whether it's being defensive or whether it's being in denial or whether it's being negative, whether it's being sensitive, whether it's being offended or whether it's being triggered? Other people's words only have the power you give them. But if it's our habit to evaluate with honesty, then we get a different response. But if it's our habit to have a knee-jerk reaction or always be offended or always look for an offense, then you can find judgment, non-inclusion, hate, and racism everywhere because we've been ingrained to see it everywhere. A response not accompanied by an intentional thought is probably a deadly habit. Now, to control our habits, the difference between mindless rituals versus a thoughtful protocol the traditions of society or religion lies in analyzing what we are doing, why we are doing, and asking, are we just doing what we are doing because it's what we've always been doing? Or are we doing what we're doing because that's what we were just doing? In other words, am I just doing this because I was just doing that? I'm doing this because I was recently doing it, is maybe a more accurate expression of that question. Once these things get analyzed, once we decide, hey, there's a purpose, there's an intention, and I'm not falling into a mindless ritual. I'm not falling into a traditional behavior just because it's easy or comfortable or I'm used to it. You see, if we don't control these things, once these things get shaken up, and once we do them without thought or without purpose, our habitual thoughts, our habitual perspectives, our habitual perceptions, our traditions, and our actions, they build up a pressure and they have a force all of their own. And once we shake those things up, they are released with force into our lives that have devastating effects, and they cause a lot of discomfort, and they make a very, very big mess. In controlling our habits, we should make sure that the things that stir us up do not have the power to shake us up simply because that's our habit. Using the tool of shortwave radio, World Christian Broadcasting literally covers the world every day with the gospel. They use 2 large curtain antennas. One is located in Anchor Point, Alaska, and the other in Madagascar. They send out messages that are recorded at their international home in Franklin, Tennessee. They make available 40 hours of broadcast every day. The broadcasts are made in English, Chinese, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, Korean, English for Africa, and Arabic. They would love for your group to visit them. You can bring your ladies group, your youth group, or your men's group. Just give them a call at 615-371-8707, 615-371-8707, or you can go to 3Ws and a dot, worldchristian.org, find the Donate Here button, and make a financial contribution to support this work that literally covers the world every day with the gospel. World Christian Broadcasting, in cooperation with Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones Podcast Adventure.